went to Roger's wedding.
No way. That's really nice.
When you get home,
I saw you getting teary.
when you get older, you get sentimental.
Yes, I do too. I cried when I was playing Kyle, my daughter's play director was moving on, and all the kids were crying at the end of the play, and then that made me cry, because they were all crying. And I wasn't even sad.
Happy tears, happy tears.
Okay, thanks.
All right, we're ready if the board members are ready.
Okay, again, if the board members could please make sure you have your microphones on, we're going to start the committee of the whole meeting. Okay, it's 6:58 PM on Monday, June 23rd, 2025, and I'd like to call to order the Village of Brookfield Committee of the Whole meeting. Stevie, can we have a roll call for the committee meeting, please?
Trustee Ketchmark?
Here.
Trustee Whitehead?
Here.
Trustee Hendricks? Here. Trustee Naramatsu?
Here.
Trustee Kaluzny?
Here.
President Garvey?
Here. Thank you, Stevie. We have two items to discuss under our regular business of the Committee of the Whole. The first is a discussion about possibly adopting a resolution for an economic incentive policy. This was an item that our Economic Development Commission kind of vetted and had a discussion and made a recommendation. We do have a very detailed memo in our packet from Libby Popovic, our Community Development Director, but I am going to ask Libby to make a presentation to the board and the audience members, and then we'll get into a board discussion on this. So, Libby, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you. So as President Garvey indicated, the Economic Development Commission looked at different incentive policies that Brookfield currently has, and also looked at the benefit of having a more comprehensive, robust policy that we can use uniformly in a strategic way with all developers, since we have a number of developments on Congress Park, the bowling alley site, 8 Corners, we've got downtown, we've got several different ones going on at the same time. And the village has been fielding a number of phone calls and meetings as well in terms of what is the village offering as potential incentives. So in doing that, we kind of reviewed what incentives are there and then what other ones could be added. And this is the discussion as part of that. Going through that, the objective is to retain, expand, and attract additional commercial and industrial businesses, as well as promoting additional business growth and prioritizing incentives for projects that the village has a strong public benefit from. The guiding principles that were discussed at the meeting include strategic alignment with our comprehensive plan, the 2018 comprehensive plan, transparency and consistency, so it's being uniformly used for all projects and all developments, public benefit that's coming to the village of Brookfield, leveraging of private investment, and then accountability as well, and having some metrics in place. So as we look through it, Brookfield currently has 3 incentives that are in effect. We've got the tax increment finance policy, which was enacted in 2010 with the Ogden TIF. We've got the property improvement program, which was enacted in 2021, and then the most recent one is business retention and expansion, which in other words is the retail incubator program from last year. The additional incentives that staff and the Economic Development Commission looked at to include in kind of a comprehensive policy as instruction, more or less a manual that would be coming from the board directly, would be sales tax incentive program, property tax rebates, Cook County tax abatement programs, grocery store incentive, and then customized development agreements. As we look through it, the TIF proposal, we have the current 2010 TIF policy, but that was enacted when we had only the Ogden. So the recommendation is that we include all of the TIFs that are in there and then also shore it up and include additional language in it, but through amendment, to have pay-as-you-go incentive models where the developers are reimbursed a portion of the new tax revenue that's generated by their project. 2, that the incentives would be capped at 50%. So again, to have some uniformity in this, and that's 50% of the eligible tax increment. And then 3, the incentive period would be limited to 10 years. So right up front, as developers approach us and they ask for certain information, I've received a lot of questions on, do you have an economic incentive policy? So it would be really beneficial if we did have one coming directly from the board where We can give it to the developers. They can have that as a starting point at least for what the village would be willing to look at. The goal obviously is to balance fiscal responsibility with community benefit in this. And that way everyone's getting the same information up front. So that's as to the TIF. Second, we have the Property Improvement Program, which has been a really successful program. We've had a number of PIP applications just in the time that I've been here. But we've kind of outgrown some of the basic elements of the PIP, and it seems appropriate to at least have a two-tier process. So as just a little reminder, the current program is a reimbursement grant that's designed to assist commercial and mixed-use buildings. It's limited to only the TIF districts. It's intended to fund projects that wouldn't otherwise be funded. The building has to be used whole or in part for commercial purposes. There's only a 2-year limit before ability to apply for a new PIP. That's a very, very short period of time. And then the reimbursement is up to 50% of the maximum, capped at $20,000. And it includes roof replacements, interior work, and so forth. Staff brought the option to the board, to the Economic Development Commission, and they agreed that it would be appropriate to maybe have a two-tier process, as many actually municipalities have moved towards. One that kind of splits it up between signage and awnings, which is one type of grant, and then the rest for facade. So the tier 1 would be business signage and awning grant program. So that would be added for new and upgraded commercial signage to improve visibility, marketing, overall appearance within the TIF districts. It would also encourage new business owners to install appropriate signage and help existing businesses change out and replace outdated signage. The priority is going to be given to replacing legal nonconforming signs, and the grants would be to reimburse up to 50% of qualifying expenditures with a maximum award of $2,000. The qualifying costs would include removal of the old signs and then fabrication and installation of the new. And what the applicant would have to provide is at least a 3-year executed commercial lease that they're going to be staying at the location for a certain period of time. So that's as to the signage. So those are smaller, it's a smaller grant, and it's just for the signage and the awnings, which is an easier, it's an easier grant to be able to give to new businesses or existing businesses. The second one is the second tier, which is splitting it up into a facade and renovation improvement grant program. The goal being that as we have new TIF monies coming in with these developments, this grant program can certainly expand. So it's on the smaller end right now, but within the next few years, there's definitely room for growth, and this is taking that into account. So it's available to new and existing property owners of single or multi-tenant commercial buildings. The program encourages a comprehensive facade renovation, so not just painting, for example. Grants will reimburse up to 50% of the qualifying expenditures with a maximum of $20,000, the goal being that we'll be able to add to this within the next few years. It's going to include building exteriors, landscaping and site design, exterior lighting, and also screening of utilities to encourage development with that. The grant funding, once it's approved, it would only be available for every 10 years for the property, regardless of who the owner is. We've had a couple of situations where ownership has changed and then a new PIP grant has been applied for. That's not the intent of the grant, so once every 10 years for the building. And then tenants could apply for this grant with the permission of the owner, and the EDC also recommended that the sign grant and the facade grant could be applied together. So that was something that was brought up. It does increase the entirety of the grant up to $22,000.
Libby, can I just stop just in thinking about this? If a property owner owns a building with multiple storefronts, is this grant, available for each individual front or store frontage, or is it just the property in one common ownership, or
It would be one common ownership,
Okay.
unless there's an appetite to split it up. So as we get into the details, that can certainly be
Well, I was just
added.
wondering, I'm just trying to think of some of the buildings where one owner might own a building and it's constructed with like 3 distinct storefronts, so it might have 3 distinct, maybe the facade, I guess maybe the facades wouldn't be that different, but would they be able to apply for each individual one?
No, it would be for the whole facade.
For the whole
And the
facade.
goal would be that it would be a meaningful facade replacement or an upgrade to the entirety of the building.
Okay.
But the previous one for signs and awnings could be each individual business?
That could be, yes.
Okay.
And that was deliberately done that way so that the signage and the awnings could be a little bit easier for new businesses that are coming in or those that are already here that want to switch out their signs.
Libby, for the business signage and awning part, what if the property is owned by the business owner? I mean, we're requiring a minimum 3-year lease. I mean, the property owner owns it, owns the business. I mean, he doesn't have a lease on his own.
Well, if they're held by two separate entities, they can certainly just create a lease and give it to us. So that would still stay as a
No, so
requirement.
take a business in town, take, you know, some restaurant that is owned by the person who's operating the restaurant.
No,
We're
I
not
understand.
requiring a lease from them. They own, I mean, they don't have a lease. They own the building.
Right. Well, they could still give us the lease. So usually the building will be owned by one entity and then the business itself is a separate entity. So they can just give us a 3-year commercial lease.
No, I'm saying, what if the building is owned by the same person who owns the business?
Right. They will be able to draft a lease and still give it to us to meet that requirement.
I think what you're saying, it's kind of a legal contractual thing where if someone owns a building and they also have a business for various reasons, they create a lease and lease it back to the corporation that owns the building. It's more of a real estate contract type thing from a business planning standpoint, that even though the owner owns the building, he might own the building and then lease it to his business for expenses and everything else like this, so.
And it would still stay as a requirement. So that it would just be a requirement that it would be checked off and they can create a simple lease and turn it in. And we would have that in our records. So for just good record keeping, we'd be able to have that. Any other questions on this one? So for the program, the existing one, the recommendation is that we split it into 2 tiers. Then Economic Development Commission talked about having a policy for sales tax incentives. We have fielded a few questions on that. So it would be very helpful to have some guidance from the board in terms of, you know, if there's an appetite for the sales incentives. So this would be considering adding the incentives to assist private development. Any private development would have to show the amount of the sales tax revenue and the economic activity. The assistance is not going to be provided for projects that have their own financial feasibility. In other words, if they can afford it, that's not what this sales incentive would be for. There would be a clawback provision that's utilized with prorated shares. Essentially, that means if they don't hold up their end of the bargain, that you can claw back a certain portion of the incentive, depending on what it is. Sale tax rebates are predetermined for a fixed period of time with the total cap. The recommendation is 50-50, so 50% split with the village and the developer. And then the developer has to be able to demonstrate the ability, that they have the ability to construct it, operate it, maintain it. So this is to incentivize businesses that are coming, that are already operating someplace else, that already have, sales tax revenue coming in to come into Brookfield. So that would be the third, that would be the other incentive. Any questions on that one?
Not specifically on that one, but I'm just wondering, how do these interrelate? I mean, I really like the idea of the incentives to show, predictability for developers and coming in to ask, but does this give us enough flexibility if the ideal project or the ideal development comes in? If we say there's a maximum sales tax incentive, a 50-50 split for no more than 10 years, but they're not seeking any other type of incentive, whether it's, land from the TIF or property tax rebate, and could the village go above and beyond if it's the dream development and they're not looking for anything else? Whereas, is it possible, not to jump ahead, is it possible someone could seek a sales tax incentive and a property tax rebate?
It could, yes.
And does this proposed policy give us enough flexibility to say, okay, normally the rebate will be a minimum of 50-50 split with the village for sales tax and no more than 10 years, but because it's so great and you're not asking for anything else, would we be able to go up, down, that type of thing?
Yeah, there would be language, and I don't know if I have it in this one, but essentially that the village has the last word on it to be flexible, to be able to either increase or decrease any of these incentives depending on hardship, or if they're not asking for anything else, or if there's a great public benefit. So the village would always have that ability to
Okay.
exercise.
Perfect.
Yeah, if I could just add.
Sure.
Developers know this. I mean, we patterned, Libby patterned this. We've talked to other communities that have done successful economic incentive initiatives, and there's a very good likely chance that our developers coming here have already been through those type of, they certainly know all of this exists. And this is a nice, nothing here is mutually exclusive, which only limits you to one. You got to pick one or the other. Nothing says that. It just gives them an idea that we are open for discussing it and negotiating things.
I was actually going to ask about that in terms of what nearby communities are offering, and just if we have any analysis of like even region-wide, how common or not common are some of these incentives.
Yeah, we did quite a bit of research on this. In fact, we met with 2 village managers from, bigger developed communities that had economic incentive policies, and we kind of talked about the mechanics of how they work, what doesn't work, how to bring it down. And we've got a number of examples from different ones. They're each a little unique, so some municipalities don't have a full policy. They just have different incentives like grants and, PIP property improvement, and others actually have it as an incentive policy. But just going back to what President Garvey, it is in here under policy review and updates. It's generic language that can certainly be fleshed out that just says the village is reserving the right, to scale it up or scale it down for any of these. Whether we want to use them in conjunction with each other or if we want them to be mutually exclusive for any of the others, it's basically to serve the best interest of the village.
Okay, thank you.
Just a couple of more then. We've also got the property tax rebate. So recommendation is that it's 5 years in duration, so that way any developers looking at this, and Tim is correct, we've had a number of developers that they've come to us saying, do you have a tax incentive? Can we talk about a property rebate? This would be helpful that we would already have something of this nature in place. Recommendation is 5 years. Private development, $500,000 for commercial or mixed-use developments, and $1 million for industrial developments. There's a phase-out option too, where it could be 100% upfront, and then it phases out to maybe 20% towards year number 5. For the property rebates, it has to be located in a priority development area, and for this, we looked at the comprehensive plan and looked at Ogden, Grand, 8 Corners. I did not include 47th on there, though. So that's an oversight. I think 47th would be able to fit in there as well, so that can certainly be added. And that's to create retention of permanent or full-time jobs. So this is bringing in jobs as well that have places that have significant sales tax. And for this one, it's like with TIF, it's the but-for analysis. But for this kind of rebate, this project wouldn't occur without an incentive. So that's one. And again, they're not mutually exclusive. Someone could apply for a property tax rebate, and we could also work out a sales tax incentive if it's a business that's coming that we really find desirable and there's a public benefit. The other one isn't one that the village would necessarily apply for. It's one that individual developers would apply for, but it's the Cook County tax abatement programs, and there's 3. One is 6B is for industrial properties, which would be more applicable for Ogden and 47th. And then there's a breakdown of how that tax abatement program would work. This is where the developer would apply to Cook County for the property tax abatement, but the village would support it if we found that it's one that we want to support. And the breakdown's kind of 10% of the fair market value for 10 years, then 15 years in year 11, 20% in year 12, and then it reverts to the 25% standard. And then there's...
This would
yeah.
apply to the industrial district along Southview too, correct?
Yes. Yeah, that should be added as well. There's the Class 7A, which is for more small projects, commercial construction, and then 7B for the larger projects. So this is just outlining what's out there, anyway, for the village to have that option to be able to consider it when developers are coming and looking at incentives. Then two additional ones, we have the grocery store incentive. Some of the municipalities we were looking at had these. They had a lot of grocery stores. Ours is much more limited here in Brookfield. But we've had interest and we've had some developers asking about grocery stores and where can they be and so forth. So this would be intended to support development of either a substantial renovation or new grocery stores. Doesn't necessarily have to be a huge grocery store as long as it's full service, but it can be a specialty or ethnic food store with kind of a broad inventory, or a small format like urban grocery stores. Those are very popular, that at least have meat, dairy, and staple offerings. It is not intended, however, in all of the ones that we looked at, it's not intended for convenience stores, gas stations, or liquor retailers. And then the last one, and this one's included in a lot of them, it's just customized development agreements, which generally include permit fee waivers, expedited permitting, plan review, public infrastructure investments, and any type of discounted acquisition costs, which we've certainly looked at for some of the other developments, specifically with Congress Park on that. And then the last one is the business retention expansion strategy. So that is essentially the Brookfield shops. There is room for growth with that. For this one, it's specifically a retail incubator program that offers reduced rent space and business support by the village. It's TIF-eligible redevelopment activity that addresses underutilized land. So it can be here, it can be in any other place. And also it applies to underutilized commercial vacancies. So there's room for growth with that for small businesses and retention.
Libby, can I go back to the grocery store incentive? Are there specific incentives, or is it in the board packet, it just has kind of, you know, you kind of choose
generic.
from the ones that are already
Right.
present?
So the one that we've been approached to was the sales tax, and a lot of the grocery stores will have some type of sales tax incentive worked into it. They're generally looking for about 10 years for that. So all these incentives can be put together or decoupled as needed, depending on what the development is and what the developer's looking for.
So the inclusion of the grocery store is just to highlight
Incentivize.
something that
Yes.
we desire. Okay.
Correct, yeah. And there's others that can be added onto it as well. These are the ones that seem to fit the best for Brookfield and that we've been fielding questions on. I mean, there's land-based incentives, workforce incentives. There's others. So once there's a good working copy of the policy, it can certainly be added to, you know, as we progress and as there's additional development.
This is all great. It's a lot of things. Can I go back to one?
Yeah, which one?
The facade improvement. I am curious, you have a kind of a list of things that can be included here. I'm curious if there's anything related to kind of energy efficiency of the facade that could be included, like tuck pointing, window replacement to try and, it's making the facade nicer, but it's also improving the efficiency of the building? Or is it more just more design features here?
I think it can be included. I have seen it in others, and that would certainly fit with our sustainability policy. This was just kind of the broad strokes with exterior and landscaping and site design. So that can easily be included in there.
It could incentivize people to, you know, replace with more efficient
Right.
windows if they knew they were getting some of that additional cost,
Right?
you know, rebated or
Yeah, absolutely.
reimbursed.
Any other questions?
Any other questions or comments on the board?
On the sales tax reimbursement, that would only apply to the amount of sales tax that comes back to the village, correct?
Right. Right, so it would have to be a significant, it's not really, this one's not designed for small businesses. This is more the bigger business that already has like a good sales tax base that's coming in that maybe we're trying to bring in.
On the application and approval process, there's a couple processes that are referenced in the memo. Is there a separate process for the property tax abatement, and then the process at the bottom of the memo applies to all the programs overall? I'm just curious the distinction, because
Well, there's a separate one for the Cook County property tax abatement. There's separate forms that the developer would fill out. We would have to have our own process for the tax abatement. internally. So this is just providing the incentives. We haven't quite drafted yet, the applications or any of the details of it.
Right. Well, the process that's defined at the end of the memo, does that apply just to the Cook County abatement programs? Because there's another process that's referenced earlier under the,
Oh, I see. For
number 5.
application approval. No, that's kind of the general approval process. That would apply to all of these.
So that's inclusive
Yeah,
of
it's
everything.
inclusive.
And then there's a specific process for the property, because we define an application process for the property tax abatement, so that's just a little different for that
That was a
incentive
little bit
program.
more involved, so I included that in there.
Yeah.
This is more of the general broad strokes of, we want to be able to have a pre-application meeting with at least the community development, we could bring it in, and then submitting a full application. So just kind of setting some of those benchmarks on there.
Okay, yeah, that's,
Each one would have its own application, though, so that
Sure.
would be the next step, is to have a comprehensive policy and then have a full application that someone can click and go to.
yeah. Part of what I'm trying to understand is like the roles of village staff, then the village manager specifically, and then the village board in terms of offering or promoting the incentives, and then approving, right? Like who's doing what for each of these.
Yeah, the way this would work is, this gives us, if the board adopts this policy or a policy, whatever you end up approving, we meet with developers all the time, and they come in asking for, if we have something like this, now we'll give it to them. Then it's ultimately the village manager's job to try to work with a developer and negotiate the best deal possible under this, that's included in this agreement. So when I say the best deal possible, meaning we get the best development that fits with everything we want to do, and this cost, and we're getting the best economic advantage we can with that. That's always paramount in the village manager's mind, and by reference to the community development directors, we're trying to get the best economic deal for the village possible. I don't approve anything. I will meet with the developer many times. We'll say, well, okay, this is where I think we're gonna land, and then we put it at your plate, and ultimately the village board can throw it out. You could add things, you could change it, but village manager doesn't approve anything under this policy. This just kind of gives a roadmap of, this is what's available, and this is what they're gonna ask for this anyway.
Right, this is the menu of options.
The menu
Yeah.
of options
Right.
that I
You can
will try.
apply, yeah.
I will try to give as little away as possible to get that development. It's kind of it's a little bit of a poker game, but try to get as little away from the village as possible, and then come to you with, this is what I think the best deal is.
And the way the negotiations are happening now, even without the policy, is when they come in, it's usually with some expectation or to feel out the village on, what would the village be willing to do. So rather than have, separate standards or separate, discussions, this at least gives them a starting point that we can send it directly out to them, and also send it out to the commercial agents that are working with some of the developers, so they know what the starting point is.
To the sales tax and the property tax rebatement, I think trustee Klusny just brought it up, that it was the village portion, the same thing on the property tax. Should there be some clarification in there so it's real clear to a developer, we're not interested in us subsidizing their property tax to the schools, to the county, to the mosquito abatement. You get what I'm saying? It's only the Village of
Yeah.
Brookfield portion, which is a relatively small portion of their property tax bill.
Yeah, I do think that's a good point, and we can certainly include that, add that in there to really clarify it.
We can add that, but legally, we couldn't do otherwise.
Well, but we could subsidize that, right? I mean, we could, if their property taxes were $10,000 a year and $1,000 was Brookfield, we could offer a subsidy of.
That is not the intent, sir.
No.
Pay $9,000 to the library or to the schools. not
Right, but
village
just
general
make
fund.
it clear that it's the
Right.
Village of Brookfield portion, because even on the sales tax, the Village of Brookfield sales tax is a pretty minor portion of the sales tax that's, being charged.
Right, yeah, we can definitely clarify that in there.
Other questions, comments, suggestions from the board? Okay, obviously, a lot of work went into this from staff, researching and presenting options into the Economic Development Commission for discussing this and vetting it. And I think the board has provided some input for it tonight, but so this would be a resolution the board would pass adopting this policy. Is that something that we can, based on the input from the board tonight and so maybe some clarifications, is this something we can do at the next meeting, or do we need more time, or?
I think we can do that at the next meeting. This was just the first.
Sure. And again, as you pointed out, there's provisions for us to review and change and see what works, doesn't work, and based on what the market presents, we could review it at least annually, but as we moved along, obviously, we could, it's a policy of ours, we could change it mid-year if we wanted to, if we felt the need to it, or, like I said, if the very unique ultimate project comes forward and we need to tweak something, we could do it there, but I just shows you how far we've come. I mean, we haven't had anything like this, and now getting it down, and hearing, and I'm not surprised that developers are asking if we have this. We all know developers like predictability and knowing what costs are and what possibilities are. And putting this, I think it shows us even more, shows people more we're open for business, we're open for new development. So I think this is a great idea.
President Garvey?
Yes.
This is such a big policy, and for myself, we've only had a few days to review it, and it's a lot of this is economic issues that I'm not familiar with. I feel like, for myself, I think I would appreciate having a little more time to review it and come back one more time to the committee of the whole.
Sure.
If in case we have more questions, or as we review, I'd like to review some of the policies from the other municipalities, just to get a picture of comprehensively the big picture before being asked to vote on it.
Okay. And I respect that, and especially Trustee Cahooli's not here. Can we put it up on the July 14th committee again one more time, and then with maybe some of the revisions, suggestions, and clarifications made by the board tonight? And
Yes, absolutely.
good, it is a major step, and Trustee Hendricks brings up a good point. We can take some more time on this.
And more can be added to it, too, if there's additional stuff. I didn't reference in this particular one the sustainability policy, so that would be kind of the next, wave of editing onto it. If there's additional ones that are specific to Brookfield that we want to add, this would be a good time to do it, so I totally agree.
That's great. I was going to bring it up at tomorrow's Conservation Commission meeting, so thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Trustee Hendricks, and I agree that having a bit more time to review and discuss again would be helpful, because it is, this could have significant impact on the economic.
Okay, so we'll commit it again on July 14th, and then, possibly consider adopting it at the July 28th meeting. I'd like to do it before we take that break in August, the first meeting in August, if possible, but if we need more time beyond then, it would be nice to get it in place, but we definitely have more time and allow Trustee Cahooli a chance to have some input with his liaison to the chamber and everything else, so. Okay. Libby, thank you so much, and to everybody that worked on it. And then the final item we have up for discussion is the possible establishment of a municipal grocery sales tax. As the memo indicates, in August of 2024, the state approved legislation which eliminated the statewide grocery tax effective January 1st, 2026. And this is one of those unique taxes where it was collected by the state and distributed to us. In the past, it's been about $50,000 on an annual basis. And I don't want to steal Doug's presentation here, but this was, they did leave an opening that each individual municipality, non-home municipality, could take action to adopt it. And if I was a cynical person, I would possibly suggest that in August of 2024, there was an election, statewide election coming up in November of 2024, and that maybe certain state officials wanted to take credit saying they eliminated a tax, but then put it back in our laps and said, well, you can do it yourselves if you want. But that would be very cynical of me, so. Okay. Doug?
So just to clarify, it's the tax of the grocery tax, the 1%, was actually established by the state of Illinois. What we're proposing here today, once they eliminate that tax, is the village of Brookfield would need to do an ordinance to reestablish that tax at the local level. So the 1% is going to go away effective January 1st of 2026. That is, up there, it says that it was a state legislative law that was passed in the fall session of 2024. So it's given us time to review certain aspects of this. The legislation does provide us the authority, as what we're here today, to see if we would like to move forward with implementing a 1% grocery tax, basically. Currently, the village does collect about $50,000 annually. It's a small amount relative to our budget, but it is a dollar value that will help as we move forward in 2026. As you'll see later on in this presentation, there are certain reasons why. The grocery tax, along with all of our other taxes, and we do include grocery tax in our sales tax figure, just so you know, it is included in our lump sales tax figure. But we use that money to support public safety, code enforcement, and various infrastructure projects. We transfer money out of the general fund into our infrastructure fund to fund road programs, and every little bit helps at that point in time. As I say there, the reinstated revenue, if we move forward with this, if the board decides to move forward with it, would be used to help continue to fund some of this stuff. Okay, so this is the important part here, and then one of the reasons I'm looking at this is, in particular, is because as we approach the budget for 2026, we know for a fact that we have been budgeting in the past $150,000 plus for cannabis revenues, which we don't think will come to fruition, certainly not in 2026. Moving forward, we're not sure the outcome of those taxes. Also, our local sales tax has me worried. It's got a definite dip from where we originally budgeted for in 2025. So already I'm starting to figure out how can I replace some of these holes in our budget. We can do, as we go through the budget process and with staff department discussions, determine what eliminations we can make. Usually my process is I start looking at the unnecessary expenses of capitals. You start with the capitals, you look at some of the other costs that you can reduce. But it's always nice not to have to reduce some of those capitals only because we have reached a certain level we're comfortable with on spending that. So this whole process really is in helping me try to figure out where I can plug some of these holes. Okay, so if the board were to pass this ordinance, it would go in our code, and we would be responsible for, at the IDOR level, the Illinois Department of Revenue level, we would be responsible for this tax. They would actually collect the tax. It would show up on the sales tax returns of the different entities that supply that to us. They would collect it and then redistribute it back to us, very similar to the way our current sales tax works. So there's really it's a very fluid it's very fluid movement. There's not a lot of difference that's going to be noticed on the grocery store or even within our individual accounting here. Okay, so in order to implement this grocery tax, we have to, the way the Illinois Department of Revenue works on its ordinances is you need a 6-month leeway because they need to get everything updated in their system. So if we were to implement this tax effective January 1st of 2026, we would need to approve the ordinance as of October 1st, 2025. One of the reasons I'm bringing this now is because of that time frame. Otherwise, I would have brought it up at the budget workshop that we hold. But if we do that, then we're not going to be able to pass that ordinance in time to get it to the Illinois Department of Revenue. And then we would have to wait until passage in April for collection of this tax in June, because it's always that time frame. So that's one reason why we're looking at it tonight, is trying to get this done and accomplished. If the board decides to move forward with it, to get it accomplished, but in that time frame of October 1st, so that we can record it with the Illinois Department of Revenue. The bottom point there, and I know you know this, everybody knows this, it is important to know this is not going to be a new tax. The tax is already being assessed. Every time I walk into a grocery store and buy a loaf of bread, I'm paying that 1% tax right now to the state of Illinois. The state of Illinois is then distributing it to the village of Brookfield. We're not making any changes to our overall cost to the consumer. They still will be walking in on January 1st of 2026, paying that tax. Just for dollar principles, I just ran some numbers. They're very simple numbers. If I go into Tischler's and spend $50, my tax is going to be 5 cents. If I go into Tischler's and spend $100, then it's going to be 10 cents. Just so you know where the dollar values lie. It's a very minimal tax. And it's not that we need the revenue. I'm not saying that we don't, but I'm saying if we pass this tax, I don't think it will be a hardship, as many people may think it is. It's a very de minimis type of tax. Oh, there was a page on here, and it showed and it's in your board packet. The Village of LaGrange Park has already adopted this tax. The Village of Riverside, the Village of North Riverside, and the Village of LaGrange will all be bringing this tax, don't worry about Stevie, will all be bringing their tax to their boards in July. There it is right there. And then Western Springs, I contacted them. They have the Marianos. They're going to bring theirs in August. All of these communities on here, especially North Riverside, even to an extent LaGrange, have major grocery stores. And LaGrange has this Trader Joe's. It just brings in a lot of business. And Riverside, of course, or North Riverside, of course, has Costco. So my assumption as I sit here today is that these communities will also be bringing it in, but I can't honestly say that. Now, we could bring this back to the board if you want. We can wait until after July, but then we would have a quicker turnaround to get that done if I could make sure that these communities will probably be passing it. So that's all I really have on this issue at this point. Are there any questions?
Thank you, Doug. And to that point, I mean, this is topics that come up, every West Central Municipal Conference meeting where we get together with other members of the COG. It's, when are you talking about the grocery tax? When are you proposing putting there? Again, each individual board's free to do what they want, but I think I'm very, very confident that a lot of these towns are going to adopt it. So, if there was some worry that we would put Brookfield grocery stores at a disadvantage, that someone's going to not go to Tischler's to save the 1% and they're going to go to Costco or somewhere else, I fully anticipate, because the amount of revenue that we're going to gain, I mean, I don't think North Riverside can have the same projects and the same capital expenses without a 1% sales tax on what they gain from Costco, and Western Springs has got Mariano's and things like this. So I'm pretty confident those two towns, and LaGrange and Trader's Joe's. So, and again, Doug's point is, well, this is not a new tax. It's just keeping an existing tax in place. It's just, the state's just putting the responsibility on us so they can say it's your tax, it's not our tax. So, questions, comments, ideas from the board?
Doug, a clarification. So this is on grocery items.
Right.
1%, that's the only sales tax you pay on a grocery item. If you go to Tischler's or some other place that has grocery items and non-grocery items, the non-grocery item is still at the regular tax rate of 10%.
So as I was explaining to Trustee Hendricks today, if I go in there and I buy a spatula or something, that will still be taxed at what they call the high rate.
Right, and that 1% has nothing to do either way with it. It's not an additional 1%, so it wouldn't go down 1%. That all stays the same. Okay, thanks.
I understand, that this is a relatively de minimis tax, but I would just want to play devil's advocate a little bit. I think, grocery bills are going up for everyone, and if it's not a huge financial burden on the village, and it's something that can be worked out before the 2026, we start working on the 2026 budget, I'm just curious whether that is something we can absorb as a village instead of implementing the tax.
Yeah, I mean, we can absorb it, but it's easier. Easier is not a good word. It's more efficient. That's not even a good word. It's better for me to find plugs right now as opposed to reducing costs. And I know that came out really horrible also. I mean,
we're not blessed with large reserves. We're not blessed with large surplus money. Doug's point that he made in the presentation, this alone is $50,000. This would be $50,000 to the bad, that now we have to start next year's budget process without $50,000. Other things that are at work in our budget right now that we thought and hoped for was a dispensary at Prairie and Ogden. That's not happening. And so we're already in that hole. And so as we're trying to do these momentum-building things like investing in our infrastructure, investing in our facilities, this just makes it more challenging. If we don't have money that we've had since 1990, that's going to have to be made up for somewhere else. Our costs are not going down. Our costs for anything, personnel, for materials, for everything goes up. And so if we don't have any new businesses coming in, we are working hard, and the board has been hearing us and working with us as we try to redevelop properties, to expand our economy, to bring in businesses. Time will tell if that'll happen or not, but if all things remain the same, and next year we don't have a new development, new business, and we're already starting in the hole, $50,000 because we don't have this tax, and then $100,000 because we don't have the cannabis tax. Well, it's a simple math problem that something's going to have to give. I'll tell a certain department that they can't perhaps replace a vehicle that they'd like to replace, or other items that.
Hey, Brian, act a little more mature, please.
That the village has to maintain. It just becomes a bigger challenge. Is it possible? Of course it is. And if the board wants us to do that, that's what we'll do. But those are the challenges.
And interesting, it's a point well taken. In the past, this has come up historically over the years. Sometimes every year we get an annual water rate increase, for example, from the Brookfield North Riverside Water Commission. And some years, the board would ask that same question, well, could we absorb that this year, or could we absorb the garbage increase from Groot? Doug's always going to tell us, yes, we could, but I mean, should we, based on what's happening and what needs to happen going forward? So believe me, I've thought about it, and your point is well taken, but I think Doug will come up with a way if we don't do this, but then if you also, when the water rate comes up, Chicago's charging us more for water, so should we pay for it without existing village funds, not to pass it on to the residents? That's actually how we got into some holes in the past in water projects and water funds, because some increases were not passed on. So I understand your point, but I think we need to do this.
It's also, I know it's a relatively small portion of our budget right now, but we don't know that that's going to be the case forever, right? Hopefully, if we're successful in developing additional grocery stores in the community, there's potential that it's a larger portion of revenue, and trying to reinstitute a tax that we have taken that's sunsetted, I think could be more challenging. So I agree that the prudent thing to do would be to institute it and do it in a timely manner, so that there's no period of time where it's coming off the book. So I think for the customer,
That's a good point.
it's the same this year as it is next year if we act in a timely manner. Whereas if we were to wait, there would be that transition period that I think doesn't benefit us.
I'd like to, to your point about we are able to raise water fees because water fees are raised, and we're able to raise permit fees because the costs of working on permits increases. Just because this is now in the village control, I hope that we don't then keep thinking of this as a way to ratchet up for other revenue too. And I know that it's the state's tax now, and it was the 1%, and I'm hoping that we kind of keep it there.
It's capped at
It's
1%.
capped at 1%.
So you can't do anything
can't go
else,
any
even though
higher
it's
than
in the
the
village
1%,
control now?
right.
Yes.
Okay.
That's a good question, but that was a discussion that we had, that it is capped, so it's not, we're not going to do 3% when other towns are doing 1%, that type of thing.
Great.
I think it's a point, though, that with the water increases, that's asking the resident to pay the real cost of the water. It's not adding an additional cost on top of it, which is what this is. It's a tax. And for me, it's a question because this isn't a tax on luxuries, this is a tax on necessities. So I'm having a little bit of a hard time with that. But I do understand that we need We need that revenue to provide our street replacements for our residents. So I guess I'm having a hard time with this.
Right, and those are also necessities, right? So infrastructure improvements, same, so it's necessities, paying for necessities, so I understand, but I have the same concern for sure.
Doug, are you familiar with the history of the tax before 1990? Were groceries charged at the regular sales tax rate? And then it
No,
was-
you know, I saw that all of this, the grocery tax rate went in 1990, but I did not go back any farther to find out what that was prior to that. I apologize.
If it was taxed at a regular rate and it was reduced in 1990 to be only 1%.
Yeah, I mean, I see what you're saying. I can go back and double check and everything and see what it was before that law was enacted. That won't be difficult.
I don't know for sure about your question, Trustee Ketchmark, but taxation in grocery stores in Illinois is very complicated. Your shopping cart, if you have milk and eggs,
Right. So all different
that's
rates.
not taxed at 1%. That's taxed lower. If you buy, somebody said a spatula, deodorant, shaving cream, that's taxed at 1%. I think I don't know how many different tax rates.
Levels.
But
There's an
it's-
RTA sales tax.
It is extremely complicated. So to the point that Trustee Naramatsu and Trustee Hendricks said, if you're buying the true necessities, vegetables, fruit, that is not taxed at 1%. That's taxed lower. It's what the state categorizes as, I don't know what the right word is, not superfluous, but non-essential items. They're the ones taxed at 1%. I think there's 3 different tax rates at work. on a typical
Isn't that
grocery-
spatula taxed at 10% though?
It's much
I don't know.
Yeah,
At a
Doug's
regular-
examples, it's not a grocery, so it's the regular sales tax. I think the spatula was a different example, but there's different, the essential foods, milk and things are different. I think we could all see that on our, our tax bills. But
Can I just make, I also just want to acknowledge that, 1% tax on groceries or essentials is maybe not, is de minimis for maybe most Brookfield residents, but I think it doesn't applies disproportionately across the community to lower income families. So I don't want to pass a tax just to pass a tax, even though it's, retaining the status quo. So just something to think about.
all right, well, here, there's good points on both sides. Let's put it up in 2 weeks and see how everyone feels about it. If Trustee Gahuli needs more time, or if there's more time, we can go beyond that. I mean, we do face the deadline. I do suggest if we're ever going to do it, we do it this year as opposed to skipping it for a year and then try and reimpose it later on. And to Trustee Whitehead's point, we have a excellent grocery store in town and some of the other stores. But, if something changes in the next, where we have a larger grocery store, we'll be leaving significant revenue on the table, so. And again, it goes to the point of, what other towns are going to do and have done. Like I said, I'm always worried about putting our stores at a competitive disadvantage, but we've talked about this before when we did a local 1% sales tax on gas. Is someone going to go to the next town to save 1%? We didn't see that happen. I don't think they're going to go somewhere else to avoid, another town to avoid 1% on a grocery, so. So can we put this up for the first meeting in July?
Yep.
All right, thanks for all the work on this, Doug and everybody. Okay, that ends the items we have up for discussion. Now I will open up, this is the appropriate time for public comment. Is anyone, Brian, did you want to come up and say something? You jumped in public comment earlier. You want to come up and say something? No? Okay, anyone else? Yes, sir, if you could please come up.
This has to do with the EV charging. Y'all know.
If you could just state your name for the record.
David from Blue Sky Builders. Regarding the EV charging on single-family residential, Roger, now that he's retired, I had spoken with him about this last year, and if he would permit separate 100-amp services from pole to garage, like Oak Park, Western Springs, LaGrange Park, LaGrange, Evanston, and Westchester. All of DuPage County at this time is prohibiting it. Cook County is prohibiting it. Various municipalities are doing it, and as long as ComEd has the infrastructure, they're okay with it. The key is many older homes have old 100 amp services, and in order to support level 2 charging, 60 amps sub-panel, 240 volts with a 40 amp 14-50 receptacle to plug in a charger, you're overloading the 100 amp service on the home if they have an air conditioner. Brian, the electrical inspector in Oak Park, was kind enough to teach me all this because they require it now. So my question is, as part of this EV push, are you going to allow separate services, or do we still have to come from the house? And then people will be, if they want to do an EV charger, they're going to have to do a 200 amp service upgrade on their home, which costs even more. That's it.
Well, we adopted what we adopted tonight, and we'll review things going forward, so thank you.
Yep.
Okay, any other appropriate public comment on this side? Hearing none. Any comment on this side? Hearing no further public comment, Tim, is there a need for executive session? Thank you. Okay, no further business. I'd entertain a motion to adjourn the committee of the whole at 7:53 PM.
So moved.
Second.
Motion was made by trustee Naramatsu, second by trustee Hendricks. Roll call, please.
Trustee Ketchmark?
Aye.
Trustee Whitehead?
Aye.
Trustee Hendricks?
Aye.
Trustee Naramatsu?
Aye.
Trustee Klusny?
Aye.
Okay, we're adjourned at 7:53 PM. Thank you.
Yes, well, hopefully I gave him my card, so hopefully he'll.